17.6. Listening. Part 3. Emigration. Exam practice. You'll hear part of a lecture.
And in the 19th century, huge changes in population took place which affected the entire world. The world population grew from 900 million in 1810 to 1,600 million 100 years later. So, throughout the 19th century, a pattern of voluntary and enforced emigration developed, reaching its peak during the 100 years from 1830 to 1930. Now, there were many reasons for this. The famine caused by the failure of the potato crop in Ireland and other harvest failures in agricultural regions all over Europe. Religious persecution, such as that suffered by the Jews in Russia. Unemployment in urban areas, and so on. But they all had one thing in common. The emigrants had nothing to lose. All right? So whatever happened to them at the end of their journey, it just couldn't be worse than what they were experiencing at home. But there were also, of course, the advertised attractions of the New World, a place where, according to advertisements and rumour, cheap or even free agricultural land was on offer, where a penniless immigrant could become a millionaire. But, of course, as we know, the reality was different. The streets were not paved with gold, and reality for a poor immigrant could be trying in vain to grow crops on semi-desert land in Montana, or living 10 to a room in New York and working for 8 cents an hour in a clothing factory. Yes, really, 8 cents an hour. But still, there were opportunities, and it was probably better than the life they had left behind them in Europe. And the countries of the New World encouraged immigrants to come with promises of a better life. Yes, in the front there.
Where did they come from, and where did they go to?
Well, the largest number of emigrants in the 19th century was from Great Britain. 11 million went to the USA and Canada, 2 million to Australia and New Zealand. The next largest, give me 1 second, the next largest number was Germans. Over 6 million emigrated, mainly to the USA, but also to Canada and even southern Brazil. 5 million Italians emigrated to the United States, and many more Italians went to Argentina. 4 million Irish people went to the USA, many as a result of the famine in the 1840s and its aftermath. Yes, that was the when 1 million people had died of starvation when the potato crop failed, as I'm sure you know. 2 million Russian emigrants, many of them Jewish, went to the United States. And then from Spain, most Spanish emigrants went to Argentina, and from Portugal especially to Brazil. Oh, and large numbers of French people emigrated mainly to Canada and to North Africa, particularly Algeria.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What about Africans? The slaves weren't emigrants, but they did settle in new countries too, didn't they?
Good point. Yes, we mustn't forget that the slave trade was still flourishing during the first half of the 19th century. Africans were still being shipped to the United States, to South America and to the Caribbean, where their descendants now form the majority of the population on virtually every island, if not all, yes.
So it was the USA which received the largest number of immigrants?
That's right, it was. Between 1830 and 1930, let me just get this right, yes, 35 million immigrants entered the United States. Proportionally, Australia certainly beats that. Australia's population grew from a few thousand in 1800 to 5 million by 1900. Yes, on the left there.
So far you've mentioned only the New World, but I take it it wasn't just Europeans who emigrated.
No, by no means. Many people from India went to East Africa and South Africa, firstly to work temporarily as labourers on plantations, and many of them never returned home. The Chinese went all over the Pacific, particularly to the various countries of Southeast Asia, and also to the United States, where they hoped to make their fortunes in the gold rush, and worked subsequently as labourers building the railroads, and most stayed on afterwards.
You're talking about what happened 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was wondering, what are the effects of all this on the countries today?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. The number of second and subsequent generations grew and grew, of course. There are well over 30 million Chinese people scattered around the world outside China and Taiwan. In the USA, because of the so-called melting pot effect, the descendants of the early immigrants became English-speaking Americans. But more recent immigrants have retained their cultures and languages. For example, if you go to Argentina, there are districts in Buenos Aires where you can still hear Italian being spoken, just as there are German-speaking communities in southern Brazil, where even second and third generation immigrants still speak German as well as Portuguese. Yes. In fact, almost every country has received immigrants at some time in its history. Some of this has happened more recently. Many Greeks, for instance, emigrated to Australia in the 50s and 60s. The third largest Greek community in the world is in Melbourne. And huge numbers of people from Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean have been emigrating to the USA since the 1940s. Cubans in Florida, Mexicans in California. And there was also a big influx of Koreans in the 70s and 80s. The world's second largest Korean community lives in Los Angeles, yes.
But how can you tell what nationality someone is descended from? I mean, if they're Korean Americans, they'll probably look different, but what about the Europeans?
Well, actually, a good way to find out the origins of people, if you go to a North or South American country, is to look in the local phone book. Yes, strange but true. You see Swedish surnames in the Midwest of the USA, Italian surnames and Jewish names in cities like New York, Ukrainian names in Pennsylvania, Chinese and Korean names in California. In Canada, there are many Scottish surnames. And all over North America, you'll notice Irish names, Polish names, Hispanic names, and so on in the phone book. And interestingly, even if the grandchildren don't speak their grandparents' language, they often still do eat their national dishes at home or in restaurants. And this variety makes life for everyone in the country more diverse and interesting. So, many people in North and South America can trace their ancestry back to another country and rightly are proud of their origins.